Aragorn lived a long life, ruled in peace, and died willingly at the age of 210. But his death left behind a far quieter tragedy. His wife Arwen had chosen mortality for him, and after the King of Gondor died, she was left completely alone in Middle-earth. So what became of Arwen after Aragorn's death? Did Elrond's dark warning truly come to pass? In Peter Jackson's films, Arwen's fate is hinted at, but never fully explained. During The Two Towers, Elrond warns his daughter about the consequences of her choice. If she remains in Middle-earth and marries Aragorn, she will become mortal. Aragorn will grow old and die, while she will be left behind in grief. Elrond paints a haunting image of what that future could look like. Arwen wandering alone through fading forests, watching the world slowly empty around her. For many viewers, this warning creates a lasting impression that Arwen's future would be an endless life of sorrow. The films strongly imply that she'll outlive Aragorn and remain in Middle-earth as a lonely and fading figure. But the story ends with Aragorn's coronation and their marriage. The films never show what actually happens afterward. As a result, many viewers assume that Arwen's fate remains uncertain, or that she continues living for centuries like other elves. Others interpret Elrond's words literally, imagining Arwen wandering forever beneath the trees, unable to escape the grief of Aragorn's death. But Tolkien's writings give a much clearer and far more tragic answer. To understand what truly happened to Arwen after Aragorn died, we need to turn to Tolkien's original text. But Tolkien's writings reveal that Arwen's fate was not left uncertain. In fact, Tolkien tells us Arwen's fate after Aragorn's death. The account appears near the end of The Return of the King in the appendix titled The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen. There, Tolkien describes the final years of Aragorn's life, the moment of his passing, and the quiet tragedy that followed. What we discover is that Elrond's warning in the films was not entirely wrong. Arwen did indeed experience the sorrow he feared, but the reality was both more complex and more final than many viewers realize. Arwen did not remain immortal. She did not sail west to Valinor with the other elves, and she did not remain indefinitely in Middle-earth. Instead, she made a decision long before Aragorn's death, one that would determine her fate completely. To understand what happened to Arwen after Aragorn passed away, we must first understand the nature of that choice and the ancient fate of the half-elven. To understand Arwen's fate, we first need to understand who she was. Arwen was not a full elf in the same sense as Galadriel or Legolas. She belonged to the Peridil, the half-elven, a lineage that carried both the blood of elves and men. This lineage descended from Arundel and Elwing, whose children were given a unique choice by the Valar. They could choose whether to live as elves or as men. Tolkien explains that this choice passed down through their descendants. Elrond chose the fate of the elves, becoming immortal and eventually sailing to the Undying Lands. His brother Elros chose the fate of men and became the first king of Numenor. Arwen inherited that same choice. For most of her life, she lived as an elf, dwelling in Rivendell and later in Lothlorien. Like the Eldar, she was immortal so long as she remained bound to their fate. But when she chose to marry Aragorn, that destiny changed completely. Tolkien writes that after the destruction of the One Ring and the fading of the three Elven rings, the time of the elves in Middle-earth was coming to an end. At that moment, Arwen made her decision. When the Great Ring was unmade, and the three rings were shorn of their power, then Elrond grew weary at last and forsook Middle-earth. But Arwen became as mortal women. This decision meant that Arwen would share Aragorn's fate. She would grow old, and eventually she would die. But it also meant something even more profound. Once she chose mortality, she could no longer sail west to Valinor. When her life ended, her spirit would follow the mysterious fate of men, a destiny even the elves did not fully understand. In other words, Arwen did not simply choose to marry Aragorn. She chose to leave the immortal world forever. Tolkien describes the final years of Aragorn and Arwen in The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen, found in the appendices of The Return of the King. It's one of the most emotionally powerful passages in the entire Legendarium because it shows the moment when Aragorn's long life finally comes to an end. After ruling Gondor and Arnor in peace for more than a century, Aragorn felt the strength of his life beginning to fade. Like the ancient Númenórean kings before him, he chose the moment of his passing rather than waiting for old age to take him by force. Tolkien writes, "Then Aragorn laid him down upon the long bed that had been prepared for him, and he said, 'Here is the last bed that I shall ever lie upon.'" Arwen was with him in those final moments, but she struggled to accept what was happening. Tolkien explains that even though she had chosen mortality long ago, the reality of Aragorn's death was almost unbearable. Then all left him save Arwen, and she stood alone by his bed. And for all her wisdom and lineage, she could not forbear to plead for him to stay yet a while. Tolkien then makes a crucial observation about Arwen's experience. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to share the fate of men. She was not yet weary of her days, and thus she tasted the bitterness of the mortality that she had taken upon her. Aragorn gently reminded her that this decision had been made long before when they first pledged themselves to each other. "The choice of Lúthien was yours, even as it was hers." In other words, Arwen had followed the path of her ancestor Lúthien, who also gave up immortality for the man she loved. Aragorn then spoke one final line that reveals Tolkien's deeper view of death in Middle-earth. "Behold, we are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory." With that, Aragorn surrendered his life peacefully, but Arwen's story was not yet finished. What Tolkien reveals in this story is that Arwen's tragedy was not simply Aragorn's death. It was the loneliness that followed. For centuries, Arwen lived among the elves. She had known the long memory of their kind, the calm acceptance of time, and the slow fading of the world. But once Aragorn died, the reality of her choice became fully clear. She was now mortal. And unlike the elves, mortals do not remain in Middle-earth indefinitely. After Aragorn's death, Arwen did something remarkable. She did not remain in Minas Tirith as queen. Instead, she gave up her place beside the throne and left the city entirely. Tolkien writes that she said farewell to her children and departed alone. Her destination was Lothlorien, the forest where she and Aragorn had once pledged themselves to each other many years earlier. But when she arrived, the world had already changed. Galadriel had departed. The elves were gone. The once radiant realm of Lothlorien had grown silent and empty. Tolkien describes the forest as abandoned and fading, a symbol of the passing of the elves from Middle-earth. In that quiet and empty land, Arwen wandered for a time, remembering the life she had shared with Aragorn. This detail is important because it shows that Elrond's warning in the films was partially correct. Arwen did become a solitary figure beneath the trees, but she was not condemned to wander forever. Her fate was far more human than that, and it would come sooner than many viewers expect. Tolkien tells us that Arwen's story ends quietly in the same place where her love story began. After wandering in the now empty woods of Lothlorien, she came at last to Seren Amroth, the green hill where she and Aragorn had first pledged themselves to one another many years earlier. There, Tolkien writes, she laid herself down upon the grass, and she died. There at last, when the Malorn leaves were falling, but spring had not yet come, she laid herself to rest upon Seren Amroth, and there is her green grave, until the world is changed. Arwen died only 1 year after Aragorn. She didn't remain in Middle-earth for centuries. She didn't sail into the west with the elves. Her choice had been final. By choosing Aragorn, she had chosen the fate of men, the mysterious destiny that lies beyond the world. In that sense, Elrond's warning was both right and wrong. Arwen did experience deep sorrow after Aragorn's death, but she was not left to wander forever. Instead, she followed him beyond the circles of the world, just as Aragorn had promised when he said, "Beyond them is more than memory." And so the story of Aragorn and Arwen ends not with the king's coronation, but with two lives that chose mortality and whatever lies beyond it. And if you'd like to explore another hidden question from Tolkien's writings, watch our next video, Did Sauron Ever Consider Surrender? It explores one of the most misunderstood moments in the history of Middle-earth.